Okay, so thanks a lot. By the way, I'm not the head of division, so my boss is not here, so it's fine, but I'm not the head. But however, I'm very happy to be here, and yesterday was already very interesting for me to watch you, to listen to you, learn from you, give some input. Today my presentation is focused on climate change adaptation strategies. So you see, by the way, you see one of the worst or maladaptation in Austria. It's artificial snowmaking in quite low-lying areas in Lower Austria, where it's very energy and water intensive. So this is some sort of adaptation we are not aiming at, but I present this as first slide, and you will see much more. My presentation is divided into three blocks. The fourth one will be some addition if there's time left. First, I will give a quick note on adaptation, on the concept itself, and then approach for the classification of measures. The second is focused then on the Austrian adaptation strategy and on the process we had for that one, and the lessons we learned. Might be very interesting for you. The third block is then about the rather quick note on the EU adaptation strategies, because there is still is an ongoing process now, and the details are still confidential, but a quick note is absolutely okay, and I reconfirmed that with our colleagues in Brussels. And also a very quick, if there's time left, a quick overview of other very important national adaptation strategies across Europe. First, I think it's not necessary for this audience, but maybe as a repetition. When we are framing the adaptation concept or the vulnerability concept, we have some keywords we are always focusing at, which is the first one is exposition. So a certain region, a certain sector or company or also private individuals are more or less exposed to climate parameters or to the changes of climate parameters. This is really physical exposure to the atmosphere. Rather simple. More complicated is sensitivity. So a certain region, certain sector, company, private individuals can be exposed to climate change, but not necessarily be sensitive for these changes. So sensitivity is a more tricky thing than exposition to climate change. Both together, they sum up in what we're referring to as climate impacts. So that's just a sum of exposition and sensitivity. And if we are talking about vulnerability, then we mean an even broader thing, which is climate impacts, plus or minus the chance or the capacity to adapt to these changes or to these threats climate change is posing. To put that more graphically, do I have a pointer here? Is it? No. How is it? Is it this one? Yeah, okay. So to put it once again graphically, so we have the chance, or we are urged to avoid as much climate change as possible via mitigation. We also talked a lot about it during this day and yesterday. So we have the chance to lower exposure and sensitivity to society, to companies, to economy, and to ecological systems, and to lower the climate impacts via mitigation. But of course, this is a long-term approach. So mitigation we are doing now is getting into has a retention in the system, and we have to wait for about 4 or even 5 decades until we see success in the form that we mild climate change via mitigation. So we need to adapt. We have the impacts here, and impacts plus, as I said, adaptive capacity is forming vulnerability. And all we are doing for adaptation is more or less to milden or to reduce vulnerability, or to do an indirect access to enhance adaptive capacity. And what is important to keep in mind, and I would like to focus on that for a couple of minutes, is that we have, of course, different forms of adaptation. We have, on the one hand, reactive or responsive adaptation. If things are already happening and we are adapting as a reaction towards them. What is much more important, I think, especially when we are talking about planned and policy or adaptation via policy processes, is proactive or anticipating adaptation. Also, we can determine, and that has been done in the impact assessment of the Commission's white paper, into 3 categories of adaptation. So I will give details at the next slide. You see that here already. And of course, we can approach adaptation very differently. We can have a cross-sectoral, regional approaches. We can have just solely national sectoral approaches. And we have very important and sometimes underestimated adaptation at the micro scale, which is quite frequently not happening planned via policy processes, but autonomous. And we don't even know about it, but it's happening. It's happening at company level, farms level, for example. There is a lot of autonomous adaptation on the ground. So let's get a little bit into detail about the green soft, and another category which I want to underline because I think it's important is fiscal adaptation. So gray adaptation is, you might of course know, this is more or less the adaptation we cannot always avoid, but we should if ever it's possible. So this is adaptation which is more or less invasive, which has to do with building concrete measures, so putting cement. Okay, so thanks a lot. By the way, I'm not the head of division, so my boss is not here, so it's fine, but I'm not the head. But however, I'm very happy to be here, and yesterday was already very interesting for me to watch you, to listen to you, learn from you, give some input. Today my presentation is focused on climate change adaptation strategies. So you see, by the way, you see one of the worst or maladaptation in Austria. It's artificial snowmaking in quite low-lying areas in Lower Austria, where it's very energy and water intensive. So this is some sort of adaptation we are not aiming at, but I present this as first slide, and you will see much more. My presentation is divided into 3 blocks. The 4th one will be some addition if there's time left. First, I will give a quick note on adaptation, on the concept itself, and then approach for the classification of measures. The second is focused then on the Austrian adaptation strategy and on the process we had for that one, and the lessons we learned. Might be very interesting for you. The third block is then about the rather quick note on the EU adaptation strategies, because there is still is an ongoing process now, and the details are still confidential. But a quick note is absolutely okay, and I reconfirmed that with our colleagues in Brussels. And also a very quick, if there's time left, a quick overview of other very important national adaptation strategies across Europe. First, I think it's not necessary for this audience, but maybe as a repetition, when we are framing the adaptation concept or the vulnerability concept, we have some keywords we are always focusing at, which is the first one is exposition. So a certain region, a certain sector or company or also private individuals are more or less exposed to climate parameters or to the changes of climate parameters. This is really physical exposure to the atmosphere. Rather simple. More complicated is sensitivity. So a certain region, certain sector, company, private individuals can be exposed to climate change, but not necessarily be sensitive for these changes. So sensitivity is a more tricky thing than exposition to climate change. Both together, they sum up in what we're referring to as climate impacts. So that's just a sum of exposition and sensitivity. And if we are talking about vulnerability, then we mean an even broader thing, which is climate impacts, plus or minus the chance or the capacity to adapt to these changes or to these threats climate change is posing. To put that more graphically, do I have a pointer here? Is it? No. How is it? Is it this one? Yeah, okay. So to put it once again graphically, so we have the chance, or we are urged to avoid as much climate change as possible via mitigation. We also talked a lot about it during this day and yesterday. So we have the chance to lower exposure and sensitivity to society, to companies, to economy, and to ecological systems, and to lower the climate impacts via mitigation. But of course, this is a long-term approach. So mitigation we are doing now is getting into has a retention in the system, and we have to wait for about 4 or even 5 decades until we see success in the form that we mild climate change via mitigation. So we need to adapt. We have the impacts here, and impacts plus, as I said, adaptive capacity is forming vulnerability. And all we are doing for adaptation is more or less to milden or to reduce vulnerability, or to do an indirect access to enhance adaptive capacity. And what is important to keep in mind, and I would like to focus on that for a couple of minutes, is that we have, of course, different forms of adaptation. We have, on the one hand, reactive or responsive adaptation. If things are already happening and we are adapting as a reaction towards them. What is much more important, I think, especially when we are talking about planned and policy or adaptation via policy processes, is proactive or anticipating adaptation. Also, we can determine, and that has been done in the impact assessment of the Commission's white paper, into 3 categories of adaptation. So I will give details at the next slide. You see that here already. And of course, we can approach adaptation very differently. We can have a cross-sectoral, regional approaches. We can have just solely national sectoral approaches. And we have very important and sometimes underestimated adaptation at the micro scale, which is quite frequently not happening planned via policy processes, but autonomous. And we don't even know about it, but it's happening. It's happening at company level, farms level, for example. There is a lot of autonomous adaptation on the ground. So let's get a little bit into detail about the gray-green soft, and another category which I want to underline because I think it's important is fiscal adaptation. So gray adaptation is, you might of course know, this is more or less the adaptation we cannot always avoid, but we should if ever it's possible. So this is adaptation which is more or less invasive, which has to do with building concrete measures, so putting cement and stones in the landscape, having also energy intensive things like, for example, air conditioning or technical slope stability, technical flood protection measures, or also things like building new electricity network capacities. Although we need them, we have to keep in mind that they are also gray adaptation, and most of these sorts of adaptation, of course, have a negative greenhouse gas emission balance. That is something we have to keep in mind, and so I would say wherever possible we should try to avoid gray adaptation. Next form is green adaptation. something that was already mentioned a couple of times before, also especially in the working group, as I saw the results of the ecosystem biodiversity group. So these are measures that are aiming at raising the resilience of ecosystems and their services. So something very important. Things like, just to mention a few examples, low tillage at farm level, enhance infiltration, enhance groundwater renewable, or protect, enhance biodiversity of ecosystems, connect protected areas. So all these, most of these measures, in fact, they circle more or less around soil functions, biodiversity management, and water saving, water removal. Some attention here. So these are green measures. Sorry. Okay. Pardon? Might be. So you will see if the battery is low, it's better. It's also not better for me. Okay, so we come to the next form of adaptation, which is soft adaptation, that was tackled in many presentations before. Not with this name, but you know what I mean if I talk about non-invasive spatial planning measures, for example, and all the measures to enhance knowledge transfer or raising adaptive capacity. Well, in fact, what we are doing here, and what is the Southeastern European Forum on Climate Change about, is okay, so might be better. Yeah. In fact, what we are doing here is also is a form of soft adaptation. So we are enhancing the knowledge base, we are exchanging. So you can regard this as a soft adaptation measure already. Another thing one might refer to as soft adaptation, but I want to underline the importance of it, so I kept it separately, is fiscal adaptation. So everything that is circling around money, and money is always affecting people, affecting companies. So it's a rather important thing to trying to steer adaptation, or try to create an environment that is good for adaptation. There are things like risk transfer mechanisms, for example, or payment for ecosystem services that might include, for example, water markets, things like this. So this fiscal adaptation is something very important. What I did exclusively now for this audience is I did a first assessment of our 132 measures of the Austrian adaptation strategy and tried to categorize them according to this classification. And you see the result over there. We have more than 100 of the 132 measures are soft measures. We have more than 20 green measures, and we have very few gray, so technical invasive measures, just 5 of them, and also 5 fiscal adaptation measures in our concrete description of adaptation measures. Okay. So I've put this policy cycle for adaptation here from Horrocks et al. And also the European Environment Agency is working with this, just to show you a little bit where I would assess where we are now in Austria in this cycle, and where approximately I would see your countries now. So we did quite a lot of work. I will get into the details about the process right after. So we determined priority sectors for action. We characterized priority risks and opportunities already, and proposed adaptation objectives. Now, with the National Adaptation Strategy being almost finished, we are more or less at stage 6, what you see over there. So we identified adaptation options. We have a concrete description of adaptation options, of following steps, but that's all. So we are definitely not at the end of this cycle, because we have, so far we did not appraise the options, we did not cost them, which is very important. So we don't know how expensive it is. We know almost nothing about the financial benefits of the measures. So something very crucial, and something we have to tackle rather soon. We are just negotiating about a project rather big one to approach the cost issue of adaptation in Austria. And yeah, you see, so there's quite a lot of work for us also in this cycle left. However, let's get a little bit into the details of the National Adaptation Strategy in Austria. It's not because I think that it was an optimum process, but just to let you know how we approach the issue. And well, we are at this stage rather satisfied with the outcome so far. The overall aim is of course to reduce anticipated negative impacts of climate change on Austrian society, economy and nature. To use also positive effects of climate change wherever they are and allow synergies, and also to provide an overall framework in which adaptation should take place. The process was a sectoral one. I will come to the 14 sectors we covered so far at the next slide, I guess. And it was an iterative, participative approach. So we have close cooperation with science. We have two research programs which underpinned the process, the Austrian Climate Research Program, ACRP, and the smaller StartClim program, allowing funding for scientific projects that supported the National Adaptation Strategy. We have a very broad stakeholder involvement to support the development, and I will get into the details now. We have the coordination, and that is maybe also the reason why you see a majority of soft and green measures in the adaptation, is with the Ministry of Environment, which is now called Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, Environment and Water Management, which has the coordination and which was strongly operatively supported by us, by the Environment Agency Austria. We were steering the participation process. And we are also, well, we are regarding ourselves as somewhere as intermediate or as border institution between policy and science. But also other ministries were involved, like the Ministry for Traffic, Transport, the Ministry of Science, of course, Ministry of Economy. So there were lots of ministries involved as well, Ministry of Health. We have interest groups involved, we have the CSO and NGO landscape involved, and we have also, which is very important in Austria, the provinces involved via the so-called Kyoto Forum of the provinces. So you see Austria, of course, is a federal country, and it's important to involve the provinces.
It's EU and 9 provinces of Austria.
Exactly, that's it. So the building blocks for the Austrian adaptation strategy are, in a chronological way, we did the following activities. So first we were looking at, or we were creating a national database on what is already happening in the field of adaptation across the country, and we have put all this into an adaptation database which can be approached by everybody. I will give you it's on there already, the link to the home pages, and this one is also continuously updated. To be honest, there is a lot of research projects in there, so it's not all hands-on adaptation projects, but lots of research as well. We did a vulnerability assessment for all activity areas. So assessing current and future vulnerability to climate change in Austria, also using a sectoral approach, and but we are very much aware that, of course, this is a never-ending process, because the vulnerability assessment is always underpinned by scientific results which come up stepwise and which are extended on a more or less regular basis via running projects. The second, the next building block is, we had the sectoral studies to identify first recommended adaptation options. That is somehow a bit similar to where you are now. This was undertaken by us and a university institute, and we considered, as I said before, 14 sectors. So in the first step, we just had 5 sectors. So there were agriculture, forestry, water, energy, and tourism. Then in a next step, until 2010, we integrated natural hazards, building and housing, health, transport, infrastructure, natural ecosystems, biodiversity. And for the last step, economy, urban areas, spatial planning, and disaster management, disaster risk reduction. Just to let you know, the Red Cross was involved in disaster risk reduction, obviously, in health, and in natural hazards. So we did what we did. We had more or less B-model approach. We had mini workshops with selected experts per sector. And we had, and this served, of course, as a basis for further discussion within the process. But we also had, at the end, we had workshops at the ministry where all sectors were involved, and where we also tried to grab cross-sectoral dependencies or interferences, synergies and conflicts among the sectors. So that was, I think, important on the one hand to have really a sectoral approach, but on the other hand to have all the sectors together in order to be aware of conflicts and synergies among these 14 sectors. Important for us as a milestone was the so-called policy paper, which always gave up-to-date state of the art of the adaptation process, and which was more or less the reference document also for the ministry as coordinator of the process. We were lucky that we had some financial support also from the ACRP program, which I formally mentioned, and to sum up again the objectives that were first raise awareness about climate change in general and the need for adaptation within this, or with this participation process of many institutions involved, and of course also improving the national adaptation strategy through involving relevant stakeholders, benefit from their specific expertise and practical experience, but also to provide a platform to discuss conflicts, as I said before, and develop balanced solutions, and also fostering transparent decision making. And what was even, I would say, one of the most important things, to have a really broad stakeholder approach and to involve many institutions, many experts, many people, many policymakers, many CSOs and NGOs as much as possible, is to enhance the acceptance of the results. Because people are always much easier accepting results when they were involved in the process to produce them. So that is one thing which is really important to emphasize. So have just try to have a process which is as broad as possible. Try to involve as many people as possible, because then you have a broad acceptance of the results in the end. And it also, and by the way, of course, this facilitates also the implementation of the national adaptation strategy in the end, which is nothing but easy. So altogether we had 84 institutions involved with, I don't know, around 200, 300 people. We had federal ministries, provincial ministries, we had interest groups, the Chamber of Labor, Agriculture, we had the WWF involved, so NGOs, the Red Cross, CSOs involved. So a really broad process, and this was all a really huge boiler. So this was accompanied, of course, this process by a web portal where all the most relevant information was always put in. I have to excuse, this is still a bit weak, the English part of it. It's existing, so you can have a rough access via English as well, but we are working on that to have a better English presentation of the process and of the state of the art and adaptation in Austria. So also there you find the database, as mentioned before, database on existing measures in Austria, and many other fruitful information. This is the database, right? And I want to stress, because I haven't heard this in the audience so far, I don't know if you're aware of that, a recent development is that the European Commission has has contracted a consortium coordinated by the European Environment Agency, which has set up the Climate Adept platform. So you can approach via this webpage, the Climate Adept platform, which gives you insights into the state-of-the-art of adaptation measures all over Europe. It's not yet finished, of course, but it already gives you a very good flavor of where adaptation is right now across the European member countries. Also, what we did is we tried to involve the general public via an online survey. We had rather good feedback and of course communicated that also via our web portal. Also, we have issued now already four newsletters for adaptation in Austria, and also giving state of the art in European and global policy on adaptation. So this is rather fruitful information, I would say, for the Austrian key players. So it's only in German, excuse, but of course you can sign in for this newsletter. It's completely for free. Oops. Okay. So let me come to the lessons learned we had so far from the national adaptation process in Austria. First of all, the important factors for a successful process. The first one is, of course, we have to have a political and public awareness for the need of adaptation. This is important, and it's a broad thing, and it's not always working properly. So I have to stress as well that we, for example, in Austria, we have a very lively press and media landscape, and it's sometimes it's not easy to try to have some sort of common communication approach on the necessities of climate change adaptation in Austria, because the media has taken up different the criticisms on the IPCC, for example, or we have a recent publication of a study that derived from monthly annual means that the weather is not changing in Austria, which was gladly taken up by the Austrian media, and we had to explain that mean values say nothing about the weather. So these things are not easy, and we have not a really coherent communication approach also with the media. So we have to work on that awareness thing. It's not completely settled so far. But it's very important. As the second pillar, we are always speaking about the two pillars of climate change policy in Austria. The first pillar is mitigation, and the second one is adaptation, just to keep in mind. Then of course it's very important to have a careful planning of the process for the development of a national adaptation strategy. I was a little bit surprised yesterday to see in one of the adaptations the bullet point, we need an adaptation strategy immediately. So I would say no, you don't need it immediately. You need to have a broad process before, and it's better to wait one or 2 more years in order to involve more people, to have more expertise, and to have a better result in the end. So it's not necessary to have a quick NAS, but to have a good NAS in the end. The participative process was the core issue of the whole process from the start. It involved science, as I said. It involved ministries, regional, local representatives, stakeholders, civil society, and so on. And we are now starting to review. Of course, we are now starting the first reviewing cycle, and we will stepwise also deepen the national adaptation strategy. We will involve more sectors. We will have reviews of the assessment of vulnerabilities based on more recent research results, and we will have a stepwise sectoral and further on an iterative approach. So this process will never ever stop, but now we have some sort of intermediate result. Yeah, so the challenges for adaptation strategies from our perspective we're at this stage as an intermediate sort of, or a state of, well, yeah, intermediate lesson learned is to get along with conflicting interests between different groups, different administrative levels. Of course, we have well, different responsibility. We have, for many measures, we have 2, 3, even 4 political scales involved. That is something which is very tricky to find solutions for. In the end, you know how the European Union is also, or it's at least in all the strategic papers, the subsidiarity principle. So to really to find the lowest possible level to find solutions. So really put things down to the ground if ever possible, and don't put it on the upper scale. So if ever possible, don't try to find solutions at, for example, European level or national level, if it's also possible to have the solutions at local level. Detect interlinkages between adaptation sectors, activities, and between adaptation and mitigation. That is also very important. It's not always easy, but as I showed you before, I think that we had we have good results so far in finding synergies among adaptation and mitigation, or at least avoiding CO2 intensive forms of adaptation as much as possible. Having broad political commitment at all levels is also a tricky issue, and it's very different which level you are in, and sometimes it's depending on people, on certain persons involved in the process. So that is always a tricky issue. Of course, the question of cost, as I said before, is something which is highly relevant, because, for example, right now we have our Ministry of Finance asking us, okay, now you developed the National Adaptation Strategy with 132 measures, how much is it? And we can say, well, actually we don't know yet, and we have to assess. And so they ask us, okay, what if you don't implement the measures, how much is that? So what's the cost of inaction? And so what we will do now is to have some sort of cost-benefit analysis at national scale. So this will be, of course, a tricky task, not easy to find solutions, especially for the 14 sectors already involved. But we are always looking forward to challenges. So also a challenge is who's responsible for implementing, for action, or also for saying, okay, no, we will not implement the actions you are suggesting. Who's taking the responsibility? And of course, there's always the thing about knowledge gaps. Although we have seen this nice sentence that we know enough to act, and I would definitely underline this. We know enough to act. We don't know enough to act for optimum solutions of adaptation, but we know enough to act for robust adaptation, definitely. 10 frequently asked questions. I said it's a bit rubbish, because these are questions which I derived a little bit from the process, and which were always in the room. Just to sum up, so first, which sectors, regions are most vulnerable? Vulnerability assessment, of course. Which parts of the economy are most sensitive? Which ecosystems might collapse or have low resilience under changing climate regimes? This is also tackling, of course, the issue of protected areas and of the management of national parks, nature reserves, and so on. Which meteorological extreme events cause major damages or losses? How is their trend and projection? We've seen the data from Munich Re in the morning session from Java. So that is, by the way, a very important source. And I had very good experience with the NetCat service, because I got the complete Austrian database for free, by the way. So that was a very good service. Maybe you can also try to get in touch with the NetCat service if it's for research. Sometimes they are very cooperative. So I can recommend Munich Re. Fifth, which gradual shifts do we have to adapt to? What we are always seeing is that when it comes to concrete adaptation measures, well, most measures tackle extreme events, and much fewer measures tackle gradual shifts in temperature or precipitation regimes. And are there any chances we should make use of? Of course, we are, especially in the tourism sector, which is very important for Austria, We are also trying to look at chances. I mean, for example, when I was a small boy, I come from northern Germany, I always spent my holidays in Carinthia. And we had almost during the whole summer, Carinthia was stuffed with German and Dutch tourists. Now when I go to Carinthia, the funny thing is, during summer, there are much more Italians than Germans and Dutch. So the tourism streams have somehow changed. So Italians are really looking for summer freshness in the Alps. And this is something we have to be aware of. And this is obviously a chance for summer tourism in the Alps. Although, of course, this is outweighed a lot by the adverse effects we have on winter tourism in the Alps. I will not get into the details. Also, very important is what is the range of uncertainty we have to face. And I said before, we are not looking for optimum adaptation, but we are looking for robust measures that are good for a broad range of plausible climate futures. That is something we have to bear in mind. So we will never ever have the climate modeling data that allows us to go for optimum adaptation. That is, I think, an illusion which will never come true. Which conflicts among stakeholders, sectoral interests are already visible. That is something I've already touched upon. And which mainstreaming potential with sectoral policies can already be detected. I think I mentioned that yesterday already in the audience. I think that it's very, very important. We see that also for the European adaptation strategy we are working for, is looking for windows of opportunity among sectoral policies where we can mainstream adaptation in. So having exclusive adaptation policy is possibly not the best way to have a high rate of implementation of measures. So, but if we are looking for mainstreaming adaptation into existing policies, tourism policies, spatial planning policies, economy policies, then we can possibly implement much more measures. And so yesterday I already presented the possibility to classify or to prioritize measures. So I will just skip these slides here. And also, oh sorry, my laptop here. So. And we'll also conclude reflecting on the national adaptation strategy, and we'll give you a quick or rough overview of the EU adaptation strategy. You are all, I guess, familiar with the, or have heard about the white paper, Adapting to Climate Change Towards a European Framework for Action, which came out in 2009 in Brussels. And more or less the EU adaptation strategy is some sort of following that way which was proposed in the white paper. So the general aim is to enhance preparedness and capacity to respond to the impacts of climate change at EU, member state, regional and local levels. And the EU Commission does not regard the adaptation strategy as how to say, a hard directive or regulation which has to be applied, but more as a frame for adaptation in the member countries. And I think for that it is very, very very important, and we are glad that we can support the European Commission in a rather big consultancy project we have to set the adaptation strategy up. The objectives are to improve and widen the knowledge base and identify gaps, to further understand the vulnerabilities and adaptation options at European level, and to facilitate knowledge use and exchange. On the knowledge level, on the level of policy making and on market-based instruments, the focus is on mainstreaming adaptation into existing policies at EU level. Of course, the responsibilities of the EU are very diverse, and we have to really check which existing EU policies are interesting to mainstream adaptation into. So, for example, the question of trans-European networks for energy and traffic is one issue where we can easily mainstream, or where we can at least try to, and we already did mainstream adaptation into these policies. And also, of course, and that is also a tricky issue, is to identify potential adaptation actions to make markets work more efficiently. I've said before, we are looking at payment for ecosystem services, adaptation market mechanisms, water markets, and all these fiscal measures to try to use the market as one tool to implement adaptation in the end, fiscal adaptation. Also to cooperate and facilitate cooperation with and between member states, regions, cities, and other relevant stakeholders, and to provide guidelines for adaptation. I cannot get into the details, unfortunately, because it's right now it's at a critical state, and we are not allowed to get into the details of the work we performed so far. But however, I can show you the roadmap, and you will see why we are not allowed to talk too much about the details, because these are all background studies at the moment we are working at. So we have identified some 12 or 13 sectors. We are providing so-called state of place, and it's just in the consultation phase, and we are cooperating intensively with the Commission services, with DG Climate Action, which is our responsible DG, but of course there are other DGs involved in the process. In October 2012, we will come out with the impact assessment of the adaptation strategy, and we will hand over that to the Impact Adaptation Board. And by March 2013, so next year, we plan to have the adaptation strategy implemented. At least that's the plan. Might take a little longer, but we will see. Can be on time. There is an online public consultation process launched, and I think that's also good for you to get more insights on how Europe is acting in the field of adaptation, on how the Commission is acting. So please feel free to get in there and take part in this public consultation process. I think how much time is left? No time left. So it's a pity. So you can read. In the end, I think all the presentations will be online anyway. So I will not get into the national adaptation strategies, although it's a pity because I know most of the colleagues in the countries. Because I was coordinating until 2009 a project named Circle, which had the task to network all existing national research programs on climate change, and also on adaptation, of course. And so we had a very good exchange, and for me it was always very fruitful to see what is going on in other countries, and I really learned a lot. I gained a lot of experience talking to my colleagues in the other member countries, and there has been excellent work being performed. But I have to quit, and I'd say thanks for listening. If you want to have more details about this Circle project, because I think it's a very good project to get involved or to get in touch with the other national adaptation programs across the European Union. And this European project is now in the second phase. It's coordinated by my dear Portuguese colleagues now, and we would be very happy to have the Southeastern European region much more involved in there. And so please get in touch with me. And I can get you into touch with the Portuguese colleagues, and you can somehow try to buckle up with this network. I think it's very good access to the adaptation society, the adaptation community in the European member countries. Thank you. Thanks a lot for listening.